You are listening to a Brawling Brothers production.
Live from War Room Studio B, broadcasting from the balloon capital of the world, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your favorite scotch, and prepare yourself for a discussion about everything board games as we present to you the Brawling Brothers Board Gaming Podcast. And now, your Brawling Brothers hosts, Josh and Brandon.
So one of the best and most surprising parts of SaltCon for me was this massive, sprawling prototype that I walked. I didn't even know where to start, but a gentleman approached me. His name was Rob, and he wanted to show me this ridiculous game of OverBattle. Now, I just want to interject real quick. Usually when a sentence starts with, a gentleman approached me and then wanted to show me, usually that doesn't really mean. Well, usually I call the cops at that point, but this is a different thing, Josh. Don't worry. So
I was confused. All right. Sorry, go back to your story.
Josh had warned me about OverBattle, and he was like, this is a big, huge game, and I'm not sure that it's going to be your cup of tea, but you know, he's going to be at SaltCon, and I want you to check it out. I walk by this table with Rob and Noel, and we see this ridiculous game called OverBattle. Now, I walked up to the designer, his name's Rob, and I shook his hand, and I said, tell me about your game. And what I quickly discovered was this is one of the most passionate, well-spoken individuals that I have met in a long time. I sit down, Josh.
I only introduce you to the best people, Brandon.
It's true. Okay. That's actually not true. That's a lie, but that's a whole different deal. I sit down at this game. I agree to play this huge 3+ hour game, and I'm concerned about it. I think I need a bunch of whiskey.
Sure.
I need some peanuts, some rations, and I need to find the fortitude to get through this.
Right.
And well, that isn't what happened at all. I fall in love with this beautiful prototype of OverBattle, something that I would never have willingly sat down and played had this guy not have approached me and told me how amazing his game is. Guess what I've done?
What have you done?
I've lined him up. Rob, the designer of OverBattle, is on the line right now.
What?
And he's going to tell everyone why this game was one of my biggest surprises of SaltCon. Robert, are you there? Can you hear me? I know it's the War Room satellite phone, and Josh's technology is dated and questionable, but are you there?
I am here. How are you guys tonight?
Rob! How are you, buddy? I remember this guy.
Hi, Josh.
This voice sounds familiar. I'm so glad that you could be here tonight. So Brandon is talking about, he came back from SaltCon, as you've been listening, SaltCon. I was really jealous that I didn't get to see you, and I was really jealous that I didn't get to play this game with Brandon, but his experience was really good, and that's obviously why you're here tonight to talk to us about that. So I'm going to kick it back to Brandon because Brandon's doing a really great job talking about his meeting with some strange man at a convention.
Yeah, I mean, let's just start out at ground zero, Rob. What is OverBattle? Maybe give us a quick glimpse at the story and tell us what's upcoming. What can we look forward to on Kickstarter?
Okay. Well, hey, thank you for such kind words. OverBattle is an area control game that has worker placement built in. It has an engine builder. It starts out with drafting. It has some semi-co-op components. It's got unwritten diplomacy that certainly plays out at its core. And all of that is sort of wrapped inside of a war game wrapper. So don't let the candy colors fool you. It's a serious game, but it's a heck of a lot of fun.
So you said a lot of things there, and I want to kind of take apart the candy wrapper and really understand the layers of candy that we have here. So let's start with what I think probably is one of the more compelling parts of OverBattle, and that is the background, the story. Now, you've taken the time over the course of, you and I have talked about this at hours at length, about this just world that you have built over the course of your lifetime, really. That is the OverBattle world. You've spent some time building the world, and specifically around certain characters in the story arc that involves the different characters that you'll be playing in this game. So do this. Why don't you paint a little bit of a story for us? I don't want it just to go, for 45 minutes, just a few minutes.
How do you paint a story?
Paint a story for us.
How about a picture?
How about you paint a picture? I think painting a story or a picture would be fine in this case, but do whatever you want to do, Rob. And tell us a little bit of the story of the OverBattle world. And go to hell, by the way, Brandon.
Let me get out my brush. I'm getting out my brushes. So
Good. I hope it's capable of painting a story.
we're getting out our brushes, dabbing a little blue. The OverBattle backstory. I call it the story arc. We have 4 characters in the base game. There are a 5th and a 6th that we're working on in an expansion, but this 4 characters play out in a very unique and exciting way. 3 guys sit at the table, guys and gals, and their factions are similar. They're all very, very similar. They came they play as races that are aliens.
Mm-hmm.
These aliens, they're a lot of times in science fiction, we lose sight of the science piece of science fiction. We sort of focus on the fiction.
Yeah, that's a good
There's
point.
a lot of science in OverBattle. The characters are all rooted in actual star systems, actual stars in the night sky that NASA has identified probably support life. And so we said, yeah, they do support life. Here they are. And so we created these characters based around legitimate places that you can go out in the night sky and see. And then we have a 4th character that shows up, and they play a game inside of the game. So their game is, I've been told it's nothing like as anyone's ever seen in gaming before. So that's exciting for me to be able to bring something like that. So a little bit about the story specifically. I'm starting to paint with my brush. You've got
It's a happy little picture, Rob.
That's right. It is a happy little picture.
You've got the 3 races that came together. They've been living together in harmony, called the Unity.
Okay.
One has a leadership type of role. One has a high technology type of role. And one were the Defense Legions. They were the ground pounders. And you'll see them when you see the visuals. You'll know exactly who are those 3 characters.
Okay.
We have a 4th character that showed up, and they are called the Sin. That's spelled C-Y-N.
Sin.
Yeah, the Sin.
Okay.
They show up as refugees, and the leadership called the Metarians. The Metarians have provided a path for these Sin to live amongst all the races. And so the game starts out with the Sin living amongst all 3 other characters at the table. Well, showing up as refugees does not mean that they were refugees. They have their own agenda. They really start immediately whispering in the ears of the characters, and hey, you're good enough. You don't need that guy. I'll help you. Hey, you're good enough. You don't need this guy over here. I'll help you. And so they're mingling amongst all the races is what starts the all war. And
I see.
We kick off the game right at that spark. We are friends, and then we're not friends. And the Sin sit back and say, I don't know what happened. I'm everybody's friend. And so they play in an everybody's friend role, trying to get folks to annihilate one another, all the while just biding their time until they can swoop in and take everything for themselves, or at least try.
So they have an ulterior motive, is what you're saying. The Sin do.
Absolutely.
But that's and now is that from a gameplay perspective? We'll shift there in a second. But from a gameplay perspective, that is something that is known to the players as they're playing the game. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
They do know. They do know, and what they don't know is how they're going to deal with it. They don't know how they're going to work those diplomacy issues, how they're going to work a co-op component to provide for themselves, much less deal with the infestation that is the Sin in their own homeworlds. So they do know, but learning how to deal with that is part of the game, and it'll be a different experience each time.
Okay, good. And I think that's a great transition right into probably gameplay a little bit. It's hard to separate, I think, the story because the story is so well done. And like I said, you and I could probably talk about this for, an hour at length, just the story, the world that you've done. You've done a phenomenal job building this world. But let's shift on to gameplay, and let's use some of those elements of the story to help propel us to talk about what type of game is this, what's happening here. One of the most intriguing parts I'd probably like to start with really is the fact that, like you said, you're playing one of these races. Each race does have a little bit of an asymmetrical side to them, specifically as it relates to the Sin. So they play differently than other players do. But I want to start with the setup. Now, setup is something that takes a little bit of time to do, and I want to get a sense of maybe how much time that does take. But what's really cool about the setup in this game is that you're setting up a galaxy. You have this match, you have this beautiful production, and you set up this giant spaces on the board where you have home planets, you have moons, you have asteroids, and there's this spatial element to the game that's really important. But there's a setup that follows that, and you get to put your pieces out on the board. Setup is a game that starts the game. So it's almost a game before the actual game.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about my experience with OverBattle so far is the second you sit down at this table, you're actually playing the game. So before you put one piece on the board, the game has begun. And then it's this tactical, there's this tactical setup phase. What you do from the second one is important in OverBattle.
Absolutely. I call it, most large games are plagued by setup time. It may take an hour. It may take 2 hours. It may take 45 minutes. And
it's like I'll go set up the game before everybody comes over, right, and have it ready because that takes me an hour to do.
Absolutely.
Which is to the point. Now, this prevents that from happening because you as a player sitting down to play, just as you're having a part in setting up the game.
Absolutely. Setup is the game. So setup may be even more critical than when we start to deal with the conflict in the game. Setup becomes, I say there is zero setup time. We have a game that it's modular, the board is modular, but it's 6 feet long. So I have a 6-foot board. I have over 1,000 pieces in the game, over 250 pieces for every faction, and there is zero setup time. And people are like, how can that even be? When you sit down, you settle in, you pull up your pants, and we pick a planet. And that choice impacts your gameplay throughout the entire process. The planets are different sized. Where you're going to place that planet is a different situation from the guy next to you. And then we buy up our military. We buy up the units that we're going to use in the game. And there are spaceships and factories and mechs and infantry and all these kinds of components. There are 16 different components in each box.
Wow.
But as we are setting up the game, I like to equate it to an old-time photograph where we set this photograph down in a pan of developer. And right now it's just a blank white piece of paper. And slowly the image starts to appear as you develop the photo. I tell you, that's exactly the experience you'll have when you're setting up OverBattle. As you are playing the game and setting out those pieces, you are slowly seeing how your experience is going to play out, how your war is going to look, where your people are. You don't know where they're going to be necessarily until that deployment happens, and it happens 5 by 5. So Josh, you're going to put out 5. Brandon, you're going to put out 5. I'm going to put out 5. And maybe you decided you wanted this planet. Well, maybe I decide I want that planet. And suddenly we're both on this planet. And this development of where we're going to be in conflict, where am I safe, all of those components play out in that opening hour and a half of setup that is really actually gameplay. And it's by design.
All right, so there's a lot of strategy in the setup. It really, in our experience, has been, it's a large chunk of the game. How do you build the board? Where do you put your pieces? Let's talk about a more important factor. How do I beat Josh at this game every single time I play him? How do I win at OverBattle?
Gotcha. So I've said this publicly. I will sit down and play as the designer, and I don't always win. So I think it's
that's because you're bad at rolling dice, I'm sure, Rob.
It's very balanced. We had a young lady play at SaltCon, and at SaltCon, there were a lot of first time players. OverBattle hadn't been out there before, and she won. So not only was it her first time, it's a female sitting in that role, and she won the game. So to answer your question, Brandon, you can't always beat Josh at the game.
Suddenly I'm not as invested in OverBattle.
He just has to get used to it. He has not, after 4 years of doing this show, still not gotten used to the fact that he's just going to generally lose at many games.
Victory is simple, deceivingly hard at the same time. And what you have to do is you have to maintain your own sovereignty. So you are drafting a planet and a moon, and that's yours. That's your homeworld. And each character of the three are taking a planet and a moon and calling that their homeworld. Once we go through this draft process, the last moon that no one wanted, that's the one we give the sin, because they're arriving as refugees. They really are outcasts, and they bide their time and they bite their tongue the whole first part of the game, just waiting until they can turn the tides on you. You want to give me the one moon no one wanted? All right, I'll make you pay for that down the road, and they do. But the process is pretty simple. You have to have your own sovereignty, and you just have to take one spot of someone else's sovereignty. And it sounds deceivingly simple. It is exactly the opposite. Because remember, we talked a little bit about that backstory. The sin already live amongst us. So everyone has already given up their own sovereignty voluntarily. We've brought in these refugees. And now, as we're trying to win the game, we're also focusing on our back door. We're looking at our own homeworld and saying, oh my gosh, as soon as I make this trigger to win the game, these guys are going to be on me. And that's exactly what happens. And that's
such an interesting part of the game, to interrupt you real quick, is the sin, right? They are being put on the board in the setup in places that the other players are strategically vying for. So you talked about like their homeworlds and even setting out some of these asteroids and different aspects of the galaxy that are being built as a result of setup. But as you do that, you are thinking about the other three players, but eventually you have to also be thinking about the sin, because they're going to be following your every move as quote unquote refugees, which is an extremely intriguing part of the whole setup phase.
Thank you. The refugees, the sin have their own agenda, and that player knows it.
Right.
I've got my own agenda. The interesting function is early in the game, the sin don't die. And I was always called out on that early when we started at Gen Con, and we've been at 12 different conventions in the last 8 months, a different convention about every 3 weeks. And occasionally someone will look at you like, what do you mean they don't die? Well, there's a trigger where they become active, and when they're against everyone, and then they're mortal. But up until that time, because they were refugees, you will take a bullet for these guys. You will step in front of the firing line to save them. And that's how that backstory evolves. Interestingly, Game of Thrones trailer came out yesterday, and in that he says, and they don't die. And I'm like, yes, that's my character. They don't die. That's exactly right.
I hope you trademarked that, by the way.
Exactly.
All right, so you're hitting home right here. Let's talk a little bit about combat. But the one thing I want to point out to everyone is your Cassie system, which is truly a unique thing in board gaming and something that I want our listeners to learn about.
Okay, let's talk about Cassie. Cassie is a multi-level combat field, multi-dimensional multi-level. In a traditional game, and it doesn't matter what game it is, I'll use a war game as example, but if a fighter is engaging a man, we engage on a level plane. If you're building straw and you're moving your piece through the area, that straw is right there on your way. If you're putting a train track across the greater United States, everything is linear because we're dealing with board games, two-dimensional, we're looking down on them. Well, real life isn't that way. And so we stepped back and said, how do we fix this? If a fighter is attacking a man, a fighter's going to come in from up high. And so I have a multi-dimensional board that has 3 levels, and the fighter gets to go up high and get a +1 on that attack. The man isn't just going to sit there and take it. He's going to dig in. So he's going to go hide in a car. He's going to run into a building, hide behind a tree. So he now gets to go down and get a +1 in defense. And so every round of combat, certain units have the ability to go up and down in space to take real world initiatives to deal with combat. That combat assault system we call Cassie.
So now this is an interesting part because you mentioned it there, and I want to make sure that everybody at home kind of understands what they're hearing is that you've created a game where the like you said, the different aspects of combat. So planes being up high, coming and dive bombing or fighting, the ground, and then the ability to go underground and defend yourself, that's all represented. And it's actually visually represented with your Cassie system because you actually have a physical board that has 3 different planes on it. And you put out your pieces as you fight these combats, and you can decide in which position they're going to go. So you might have planes above, what you would say like your ground forces are. And that's representative on the board visually, which I think also is something that is kind of mind-blowing because you haven't seen that in gaming yet.
Thank you. And let's deal with space for just a second. In space, there is no up and down.
Right.
And so we translate Cassie to space with certain units. If an entire group of ships were to come forward, you would leave your command ships forward to deal with the assault, and then you would fall back in space. And so certain units can fall back in space. Certain units can then take an advantage and go up in space. And those different components play out in space.
So there's so much depth to your system. One of the things that I love the most is the ability to warp behind enemy lines and make your opponents never feel safe. You're constantly fighting a war on all fronts, and in a lot of games like this, you can defend one front and feel safe because you don't have to worry about it. There's actually units in this game that allow you to warp through space behind enemy lines and attack from another angle. So you're constantly thinking about what is my opponent going to do? Am I safe on this front? Are they going to build some warp ships and shoot stuff behind me where I'm not defending? And that creates a new level of tension that I haven't really seen in a board game before. And that was really, really exciting to see that play out. We had a situation where I was playing with Rob from Blue Peg, Pink Peg, and we were playing with Noel. And, Noel was very much the aggressor and Rob was on the defense, and Rob had built this huge iron curtain. He wasn't worried about anything. And then Noel started building warp ships, and suddenly Rob realized he wasn't safe. And that's something that we haven't necessarily seen before. And it's something that really made the game extremely exciting during our play.
Absolutely. Warp may be trademarked, so we don't call it a warp. We have a jump ship, and there are 2 types of engines that were flying around in space utilizing a supermass technology, which is a slingshot. We do slingshot around planets and moons and go out into the playboard with our regular ships, so under our supermass drive. And then a little bit later in the game, we don't have a tech tree, but high technology does take a little while to develop. So after a defined amount of rounds, we have a jump ship that comes online, and you may buy a jump ship, and the jump ship allows you to go point to point anywhere across this 6-foot board. You can jump out of orbit, but you can't jump into orbit. I think if you were to jump into an orbit, you might end up face planting into the ground, and so you can't jump into the orbit. But anywhere else, point to point, you can literally take your fleet from one side of the board to the other. That technology we call a soul drive, speed of light drive. It uses matter antimatter with photons. So there's some science behind that as well. But that does allow you to quickly make this 6-foot board about 2 inches long from one space to the other with your entire fleet if you're so lucky to do so. And that absolutely, like Brandon says, opens up a whole new element of how do I maintain what I was trying to do and now watch over my shoulder what they're going to try to do to me.
Great. Now we've described a little bit of the gameplay. Brandon kind of hit on it just a second ago. There is so much that we could sit here and talk about when it comes to this game, OverBattle. Now you take everything we've talked about for the last 20 or so minutes and you wrap it all together in what I think is one of the most highly produced games I've seen in quite a while.
Josh.
And one of the best produced games I've seen in quite a while.
I want to remind you, This is a prototype. This is not even a production copy.
That's
and
right.
We're talking about it like this is off the shelf at an FLGS.
Well, I mean, I've seen the prototype and I've seen some of the final art pieces and the final styling for the game. And One of the most incredible things from my perspective is the player mat itself, the player board, right? And then as well, all these game pieces in the game. Those two things to me are just mind-blowing, maybe because there's, you said, over 1,000 pieces in the game, and then the board itself is up to 6 feet. Why don't you talk a little bit about the production real quick?
Okay, so the board is modular. We have the 6-foot board cut into 4 pieces. So a 2-player game can play 2 sections. A 3-player game can play 3 sections.
That's really good to know. Good.
Full 4 players, 4 sections. On the board itself, I mentioned earlier that we sort of negate the science part of science fiction. The image on the board is the night sky. It is the Hubble photo, the largest photograph ever taken. So when you're looking at those stars and you're looking at little galaxies that are on the board, that is the real night sky. However, we are dealing with aliens. So I took that image and I turned it around backwards. So it is their night sky. It's how they would look up and see the night sky. We would be on the opposite side of that, actually.
This guy has thought of everything.
I know, he really has. It is mind-blowing in some senses. I mean, you have this combat system. You're talking about this spatial thing that is extremely important in the game, but that is 3-dimensional. Not only in the combat it's 3-dimensional, but the movement. You know, I have this transport ability, and then I've got this. Now you're talking about the board itself is a real. It just like, it kind of like boggles my mind. It kind of hurts my brain sometimes to even think about all the wonderful things that are going on in this game.
Thank you so much for such kind words. The ships themselves, certain factories. We have a space station that builds up to 8 units. And there are 8 physical docks on the playpiece. We have a shipyard that builds up to 10 units. And there are 10 physical docks on the playpiece. And so my team and I were working on this as we bounce things back and forth. It had to pass the logic test. If it made sense logically, it made it through. If it broke down anywhere along the way, then, that would be quaint, that'd be fun, but it doesn't make any sense. And so everything fits the logic test, and I think that's why players will come away just mind blown. They'll think about it overnight, they'll come back the next day and want to play again. That's just how it is. It is, I use the word experience because it was given to me by players. This was an experience, not a game. Yeah. And so I've adopted those lines and I've just made them my own. It truly is an experience. It's not just a game.
I'm picking something up. I'm not sure. It's an alien transmission. It roughly says that there is a prototype of OverBattle heading to the balloon capital of the world right now.
What?
We're going to get a couple of plays.
An alien is telling you this right now?
Right now. Listen, do you hear that?
I hear that.
In my ears.
Okay.
We're going to get a couple of plays in before our next episode, and we're actually going to get to talk about our experiences playing OverBattle together on our next episode. I'm really excited about that. We're going to give Rob one last second here to pitch OverBattle before we sit down and tear into each other at the game table here in War Room Studio. So, Rob, you have the floor one final time, sir.
Okay, we go live on Kickstarter March 19th. So I don't know when you're listening to this episode, but we're live on Kickstarter March 19th. The game is done. We've been on the road since Gen Con. I've driven 40,000 miles. I got my American Airlines statement that said I've gone 1.5 times around the world. As a first-time creator, I am a super backer, so I am a backer on the platform of Kickstarter. But as a first-time creator, I knew no other way to take it out to the people and just show them it's real. And I tell folks the reason I'm here is to build my own army. So now when you guys play, you're going to be part of my army. You're going to be there to help support and say, no, this is the real deal. I've seen it. I've touched it. I've played it. I've smelled it. It's amazing. And I think it is. I try to be humble, and sometimes it's hard. That sounds so cocky. Sorry about that. But I enjoy it. I would play it every day because it stays with you, and it's always a different game. There's never the same game twice. The board will never look the same. The pieces where they go will never be the same. And so many games. What if you could start checkers with your pieces out in the middle? Would that be a different game? What about next time if you started checkers with some in one corner and none in the other? Would that be a different game? Well, this game provides for that difference every time. So it's never going to be stale. It's always going to give you something new. And I think you're going to not just like it. I really hope you're going to love it.
Well, there you go. I think that we got the nice little pitch there. We've talked about it right now for about 20 or so minutes. This is a really, really exciting experience for me because this is a game that I was exposed to a couple of weeks ago. I told Brandon about it, and at first Brandon was like, well, I don't know about this. I'm hearing about all these pieces.
I mean, this is a big game. We're moving all stuff around, rolling dice. This is a little, I don't know.
This is right up my wheelhouse, and I remember telling Brandon, I said, this is a game that you're going to love. You just got to trust me. And I think that we're getting there with Brandon. Brandon is like talking about how excited he is to play this game, especially here in War Room Studio. So we're going to come back and talk about that experience. Rob, thank you for spending the time with us today. I know it was a little impromptu. I appreciate it. We love this game so much, honestly, that we're going to keep talking about it in the next episode. And we're going to support this Kickstarter 100% because what we think you're doing is phenomenal. This is not like anything that we've really seen before. You've heard a little bit of that today, and you'll hear a little bit of that again next week when we talk about it. I think that's all I got. OverBattle is on Facebook. Like you said, it is launching on the 19th of March. So that's next week if you're listening to this right when it drops. So you got another week or so to prepare yourself. But OverBattle is going to be, in my estimation, one of the biggest games of this year. So check it out, take a look, and just take a look for OverBattle. You can't miss it. Coming to Kickstarter March 19th. Thanks, Rob. Have a good night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so very much.
Thanks so much for listening to our disjointed effort at a professional production. Please subscribe to our show or join our guild to get your bi-weekly fix. Visit us on social media and check out all the selfies Brandon forces Josh to post of himself. Most importantly, review us on iTunes because reviews massage our vulnerable egos. The views and opinions expressed on this show are ours and ours alone, and in no way reflect the views and beliefs of our sponsors. Insert smartass comment here. This episode produced by War Room Studios, fact-checking by absolutely no one at all, and Brandon did something.